8 players for $25,000 to play this weekend in a single elimination bracket. For those of you who have missed the qualifiers just a couple weeks back, we had the top 64 players from the May 2017 ladder on Wild be able to play in a double elimination bracket, taking 2 from each region. That's Americas, Europe, the Asia Pacific, and China. They're live here in the studio, so we get to see who is going to be able to call themselves the first Wild champion here, Brian, which is, I think, a pretty cool, momentous occasion.
Yeah, and as we keep saying this is Wild. This is not the standard format. You're going to see a lot of different decks you don't see in most tournaments. Here's one of them, a Warlock. Not something you've seen in Standard very recently, but with the power of cards like Reno Jackson, Emperor Thaurissan, Bran Healbot we see there on the screen, it can bring Gul'dan to much more prominence than he gets right now in Standard.
Absolutely, and we have a good representation of decks across the field. There's plenty of aggressive decks, combo decks, control decks, even some specialization within classes. Paladin, for example, brought some token-style stuff, which we haven't seen really ever until Wild's really been fleshed out more with Ungoro. So I'm looking forward to see what the players have in store. We mentioned that we have 2 players from each region. Let's go ahead and break down the top half bracket. The first match that Kilber and I will be covering is LvGe from China. You may have seen him from the Hearthstone Winter Championship in the Bahamas just a couple months back. So he, of course, is making an appearance in Wild as well as Standard. Very strong player. He's going to be going up against Masinc from Japan, who's also another country we've been keeping an eye on. Japan's been rising up, a very strong region as well. Fleshing out to the top half, we have Control from Canada representing the Wild players all around, and also a rising streamer, as well as SH Royal Baizi, a female player from China, which is, of course, really cool to see because, quite frankly speaking, we don't get to see female players that often.
Yeah, in the later half of the day, we're going to be seeing Alb987 taking on Noragoon, and then we will finish off the final quarterfinals of the day with Bertic versus McNuggets.
And that's all going to be day 1 action. Day 2 will be the semifinals and the finals. Just 2 quick days of action before all of us jet off to the Hearthstone Championship Tour in Shanghai. So a little nice dose of Wild before we get to, of course, the Standard finals to end pretty much this part of the expansion. And, Wild's been developing a lot, Brian, ever since Ungoro has dropped. We also saw just a couple weeks back to qualifier, there's a lot of unpredictability with the format. Some people are bringing crazy stuff. We've seen ridiculous combo priests. We've seen some very long, drawn-out fatigue games. Even Control Warrior making a resurgence. What do you think will be the dominant strategy going through this weekend?
Well, the most popular strategy is aggro, and we're going to be seeing aggro versus control in this very first match we're going to be going into in a moment. LvGe is bringing a very aggressive lineup here. We see him there on the left side of the screen. His lineup is pretty much all aggro decks, and that's very much opposed to Masinc, who has pretty much a exclusively controlling lineup. LvGe, as you mentioned, he was at the top 8 of the HCT Winter Championship just last season. He had a really impressive performance there. I think there's a game that he played against Dokpone that was one of the most impressively navigated games of the entire tournament. He played around a Leroy that came off of a Draconid Operative for the only card he could possibly lose to, and he played around it, and it was really remarkable to see. So no surprise to see him back here once again competing at the top level.
Yeah, a lot of people agreed that LvGe played some of the best Hearthstone at the Winter Championship. Can he follow up against Masinc, who's kind of a rising player in his own right? He's been playing for a while now, about 18 months, he said. He's 30 years old, so he's kind of like a full functioning adult, something that I'm still learning myself. And Masinc's dedicated himself to Hearthstone specifically, citing that it's pretty much his only focus at the moment. And it's also his first tournament experience. I got to chat with him. He was very nervous, just feeling like, I don't want too much expectation on me. I'm just trying to do my best here because, I don't want to fail and promise too much here. But at the same time, I kind of sense that he's just being modest because I feel like his preparation, bringing 3 Reno decks in a Paladin, which I think speaks to you a lot.
Oh,
Hitler.
Absolutely. If I were to bring a Wild tournament lineup, it would look a lot like Masinc's. He has Reno Mage, Reno Priest, Reno Warlock, and then, as you mentioned, sort of one of the rising star decks in Wild, which is that Recruit Paladin. We see the Quartermaster with Muster for Battle has been really powerful for a long time, but pairing that with now Lost in the Jungle, now Sunkeeper Tarim, and Lightfuse Stegodon all can really make your 1-1 recruits into huge threats in a lot of these games.
Yeah, what's really interesting too is Wild's expansions on the Wild format are expected to have a decreasing amount of value as more expansions get released, primarily because there's such a wide pool of cards, and therefore it's just less impact compared to Standard. However, what Nguro was able to do was introduce even a lot of new archetypes which have a very strong fighting chance.
Well, one of the things that's so important to Wild is just how powerful a lot of the synergies are. When a lot of people talk about Wild, they're like, oh, Dr. Boom, Pilot Cheddar. There's tons of decks that don't have Dr. Boom, that don't have Pilot Cheddar, because those are just raw power level cards. But the combined power of things like those tokens and all the buffs that you have available to them now really outclass those. So it's really cool to see those decks coming together.
Absolutely. So we're just moments away from starting our first series here at the Hearthstone Wild Open Finals. The only thing left to do, Kibler, is to sound the horn.
Well, that sure was dramatic.
Let's go. Ow. Oh, no. Hit my headset. I'm not paying for that. Coming up here, we did take a look at the bans. LvGe has banned the Priest. We kind of expected, or sorry, Masinc has banned the Priest, something that we were expecting beforehand. LvGe has banned the Reno Warlock, and that's a little interesting to me considering that I thought Reno Mage has a better chance against aggro decks than Reno Warlock, so I was anticipating that. But LvGe sees something that we don't with banning that Warlock specifically, and we'll see whether or not his risk will pay off. We're going to start things off with a deck that's near and dear to Brian's heart. I think even as recently as just 12 hours ago when you were laddering with this style of deck in Standard, it's going to be a Reno Priest.
Yeah, I did just finish top 200 Legend last season with Kazakus Priest. There's no Reno in Standard, but this is really my dream. This is Reno Dragon Priest that Masinc is playing here. He gets to play all of my favorite cards in all of Hearthstone. Oh, and he just gets to mulligan away the Primordial Drake, an expensive card in this matchup, picks up a perfect replacement in the Draconid Operative to enable his Historian. LvGe is playing a pretty tempo-based Mage deck. This is a deck that can leverage powerful cards like Mana Worm, which are available in Standard, but also Mad Scientist is a huge component of the power of this deck in the Wild format.
Yeah, and you can also see that LvGe across his deck list was also anticipating a little bit more aggro. He's teching Galactic Crawlers, he's teched an Arcane Explosion to his Tempo Mage. A lot of that kind of stuff is supposed to help him specifically keep up just be a little bit slower than the other aggro decks, but still be just as fast to punish them. However, he's not going up against an aggro lineup, so when I talked to LvGe, he said, you know what, I don't feel favored in this matchup at all, but if I can get past his opponent, I'm feeling good for the rest of the tournament.
Yeah, and when you're playing an aggressive lineup against control decks, specifically against Reno control decks, the games can often hinge on very specific cards. One of them, of course, being Reno Jackson itself. And Masinc's opening hand here has Reno, it has Kazakus, and now he's going to be able to sculpt a bit of his game plan here as well with this Historian as well as the Shadow Visions already waiting in his hand. He did pick up a couple of expensive cards now, though, which is not what he's looking for. And at the moment, he can't answer the Sorcerer's Apprentice, which can generate tons of tempo for LvGe here.
Well, Primordial Glyph is definitely a lot weaker in Wild than it is in Standard because of the access of more spells. This is something that people talk about Glyph a lot of times. In Standard, the access of spells, or the range of spells, is actually quite limited. Therefore, you tend to get a lot of consistent damage. But in Wild, you have additional other stuff like an Echo of Medivh, you have Duplicate, and all those things might dilute the pool to make it a little bit more awkward if you're looking for damage sources to pressure your opponent.
He does choose, I believe that was the Potion of Polymorph,
yes,
which is a very potent card against the large minions in Masinc's deck. For instance, if Masinc were to wait until next turn and coin out Draconid Operative, that would leave him with just a 1/1. So that could be absolutely huge. And here, yeah, Masinc is lacking in any kind of spell-based answers to this Sorcerer's Apprentice. He does have lots of minions and lots of powerful ones at that, but he doesn't have all that many ways to really deal with the tempo that's coming down right now. Kazakus, this is pretty good for Masinc in terms of the way that this is going to play out. because this is going to get polymorphed instead of one of his larger minions, he goes for a 1-cost potion, recognizing he has a lot of powerful cards in his hand right now, and what he needs is something that can actually give him tempo on this board and help him answer LvGe's threats.
Absolutely, and that's what really matters in this matchup. We've seen a lot of times where we've played Reno Jackson, and you're going into a big board anyway, so your opponent just kills you. Tempo Mage is primarily with that, because one of the ways that you can beat Tempo Mages historically was just to keep removing all of their minions. They don't have enough burn just to end the game straight up, especially with a Reno-based deck which has a lot of healing. Therefore, they need to leverage minions like Azure Drake, like Flame Waker, Sorcerer's Apprentice, Mana Worms, Pilot Shredders. If you're able to keep removing the board, then you're able to just win the game through essentially fatiguing their resources. And that's what Masinc is trying to go for, trying to say, like, well, I'll play around these secrets, try to get some AoE if I can, and stabilize, which matters a lot more than getting full maximum value.
Yeah, and Masinc now become a curious Glimmerroot, so he does have another possible play this turn. His Kazakus Potion is 2 damage AoE and draw a card, which will clear off the Sorcerer's Apprentice, but unfortunately for him, does leave the Pilot Shredder as a problem on the board. We haven't seen a Pilot Shredder drop in quite a while in competitive Hearthstone.
Not too often. I do see it. We did see a fair amount in the qualifiers, but hasn't had that big of an impact because, again, the pool has widened so much. There's so many handful of 2-mana 2/2s and 2/3s that you don't even expect to see 3 power that often.
All right, and a Meteor, we've seen a lot of those recently, especially if you've been watching any of Crypt's Arena streams.
Right.
Arcane Blast, one of the cheap spells that the Tempo Mage deck does get from Wild, takes down the Glimmerroot, and LvGe is continuing to push damage, but he doesn't really have much in the way of follow-up right here. And Masinc picking up his final Cabal card with Raza here, so he could potentially just get his healing back online, or if he chooses to try to play a little bit more defensively to the board, he can play the Twilight Guardian to try and block the damage. But he has to imagine, given LvGe's passive play, that he doesn't have more minions and must likely have removal. So getting your free heal online every turn from now on with Raza is extremely valuable.
Yeah, it's fight for tempo. It's also the turn before Firelance Portal, assuming your opponent wasn't able to draw anything to discount it beforehand, but your opponent already used a Primordial Glyph. What gets really interesting to me is also like how these decks are built out towards the mid stages of the game, because LvGe's kind of geared his deck to be very fast. He doesn't even have Firelance Portal into his deck, for example. So that kind of just shows you that LvGe is trying to play very fast and doesn't have a lot of late game comebacks compared to the traditional way that you can play Tempo Mage, which is play a little bit slow. Some even played Archimage Antonidas, for example, back in the day. Not really the case here for LvGe. He has Azure Drake's Loatheb and Dr. Boom. That's all his top end. So the longer this game goes for each turn is even more painstaking for him.
But that's a very key pickup off of that Primordial Drake. Speaking of not really having resources as the game goes on, finding a Kabbalist Tome can give him access to late game burn. But he is facing free heal from Raza now, and there's already the Reno Jackson waiting in the hand. He does have Dr. Boom next turn, but there is a Shadow Word Death already waiting for Masinc.
Yeah, what gets really hard for LvGe, though, is that he can just remove with his spells. He doesn't have he needs to hit like 3 Pyroblast type of thing, or even more Kabbalist Tome. And then there's going to come the point where Masinc takes the board so commandingly with Primordial Drake, even Reno Jackson is a 4/6. How does LvGe stop from dying?
Yeah, it's going to be very difficult for LvGe to win this game at this point, because the amount of healing that Raza is going to provide over the rest of the turns of the game, every single turn, Masinc is gaining 2 life, which means that LvGe needs to add up damage very quickly, which generally means you need to stick minions on the board. Yep. And he's getting past the point where he's realistically going to be able to protect minions.
And normally turn 7, as the old adage goes, is usually the Dr. Boom turn. But in this case, you're playing into a board where Dr. Boom could potentially just be very minimal in impact. Your opponent has access to a variety of spells at 7 mana. Not to mention that nothing really trades that well into the Shredder. The Mana Worm can get a really easy trade. Draconite Operative is a very proactive trade. This is a very tough spot for LvGe.
There's a Meteor here that would give a 2-for-1 removal, keep the board clear, but it will be Dr. Boom coming down. There is, like you said, the rule of Boom. You got 7 mana, you got Dr. Boom, you play Dr. Boom. But here I don't know that it's going to work out for LvGe, because that death is an easy answer for most of the threat of that card.
Masinc gonna trade first to see if he gets pretty fortunate and maybe has a Doomsayer lock things up for him. Or even potentially swinging the opposite way and he needs to address that minion first. So if he Shadow Word's Death, he has the availability of 4 mana left that plays pretty much into any dragon immediately. So it looks like he's choosing Twilight Guardian as his choice, just because I think he doesn't want to lose any more health. There is the possibility that Boombots put Masinc within range of burn. We've all seen that in the past. Hasn't really been the case, because if Boombots do 8 damage, then LvGe might be able to find burn through that Kabbalist Tome or potential fireballs off the top of his deck.
Arcane Explosion picked up. And this is one of the things you mentioned, that LvGe expected a very aggressive field. So his decks are specifically built to beat that aggressive field. One thing, I actually mentioned the power of Mad Scientist in this style of deck in general. LvGe's not even playing Mad Scientist. Many of the Tempo Mage decks in the format are playing Mad Scientist and Secrets. LvGe's build is actually very Flamewaker burn focused. So he's looking to punish other aggressive decks with those AoE removals, and just finds another Arcane Explosion that would be really powerful if we were playing against, say, Token Druid, Pirate Warrior, which make up quite a bit of this field, but not good here against the Reno Dragon Priest from Masinc.
And, of course, the problem for LvGe, even if, Masinc didn't have the Reno Jackson, would be to find damage to end the game. And the best source of damage in his hand is the Pilot Shredder, which immediately gets contested onto the board itself. So LvGe is really running out of options here. I think his best play is usually to develop minions, because that's primarily what the deck's generating damage from. But even if he does play the Shredder in this position, Masinc has the answer, and he has heal, and very soon he's going to start pressuring LvGe to kill him in a couple turns.
Yeah, this is really slipping away from LvGe here. And, ooh, Potion of Madness. I've never Potion of Madness a Boombot before. Feels pretty good.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Masinc didn't necessarily even need that at all. He had a very good variety of plays, ranging from Primordial Drake to Chilma in this position. But let's see. Maybe he wants to look behind the Pilot Shredder first, just to ensure that he can respond to everything. I think right now Masinc is just trying to do his best ability to not lose. Right? What are some ways I can lose in position because I'm so far ahead? And so he's accounting for all his possibilities.
Yeah, and specifically based on the build of LvGe's deck. That's really the situation that Masinc is in. Okay, I effectively have everything covered here, and we see the Nerubar Weblord. Nax is in fact out, and minions with Battlecry cost 2 more. So that Reno cost 8, but yeah, Masinc is in a position where he can afford to spend that 8 mana on Reno Jackson. I am a little surprised to see that play from him though, because I felt like he was at a comfortable enough life total that he could have potentially gotten a little bit more value with the Reno and just fought to control the board, and then prevented any kind of possible burn shenanigans later with that in his back pocket.
Well, I believe he's trying to account for for his worst possible situation, where if Masinc took a lot of damage from the Boombots, say he took 8, he was at 19, and you go back to 21. So he had 13, and he's saying, well, my opponent's also played Kabbalist Tomes and not played a lot of those spells from them. He's holding so many cards, and he only developed Pilot Shredder. He has to be holding a lot of burn. But it's like you said, he definitely could have squeezed out more value based off what we know.
What was his life total exactly at that point?
It was at 19. Yeah, and then he healed for 11 with Reno.
Right. So, but he could have just healed himself going to 21, because he could have used Potion of Madness on the Boombots there, and then played out just more to the board. He could have even potentially attacked into and killed the Weblord and just played out, say, Twilight Drake. He'd still have a very impressive board there, and would still have Reno in backup. But he still is in a pretty comfortable position here, regardless.
A little interesting that Masinc floated 2 mana for Shadow Visions. I think he wants to keep his options open in case he needs to dig for a very specific spell. And remember, there's only one of, so he has to be very deliberate with the Shadow Visions. You can't just toss it for a generically good card in this matchup. Usually the card that, in my opinion, works the best, if not Potion of Madness, is Shadow Word Pain, primarily because you can deal with pretty much Mana Worm, Sorcerer's Apprentice, and the Flamewaker, and everything else that's early game based. But Masinc didn't even need that, primarily because LvGe didn't have that explosive start that we normally see from Tempo Mage.
Yeah, and LvGe will just have to finish this game off more or less with burn at this point, because he has no minions in his hand. And frankly, a lot of the cards that he's gotten from his random spell generation aren't burn. They're minion removal. And that's pretty problematic, because they're minion removal that doesn't even line up very well against the minions Masinc's deck plays. Things like the Arcane Explosion.
LvGe just going to use his great arcane missiles, try to be as mana efficient as possible. But until he picks up Flame Wakers, his hand's sitting a little awkwardly. And
it is.
Speaking of awkward, the Masinc's hand is very expensive due to the Narubar Weblord, which is a card that people were saying, you know what, maybe if this card would help against Quest Rogue, it wouldn't be that bad.
Ooh. I would definitely play Weblord instead, or just try to beat this deck.
Especially in like a Kazakus Priest.
Yeah,
like
sure.
Well.
Just be right in my deck. All right, so a Cult Sorcerer, that is a card that can potentially give a little bit more oomph to LvGe's burn. Frankly, I think LvGe is in on Flamewaker now. I think that that's really what he's looking for. I mean, we understand we're talking about how this is not really much in the way of significant actual burn damage, but he has a ton of cheap spells. So if he does find Flamewaker, he could potentially fire a bunch of shots Masinc's way, but he does not have that much time to do it because the pressure that Masinc's minions are going to generate, as well as just the outpacing of the hero powers.
Yep, I completely agree. But I do think that LvGe, if he does pick up the Flamewaker, is not even necessarily in like an equal spot. He might actually be favored from that position because if he's able to keep this Cult Sorcerer on the board, that's like a ton of damage that he can push out and really force the Priest in an awkward spot. One thing that's interesting is LvGe is even playing the Cult Sorcerer. Sometimes the Temple Mage even saves that so they can play Flamewaker, Cult Sorcerer, play a bunch of these spells with spell damage. You look at Arcane Blast, for example, being a very powerful addition with that combo. And then be able to come back immediately onto the board. Maybe LvGe feels like he really needs to get this damage in, and he can leverage the existing spells to try and get some pressure, but it didn't work out.
I believe that Masinc is out of Dragon Synergy cards. No, he does have. Actually, he doesn't have a Blackwing Corruptor in his deck. I was going to say he has Corruptor left, but I believe that this Bookworm is the last card that requires him to hold a dragon in his deck.
Pretty interesting.
So he could just play the Twilight Drake as his last dragon and not worry about it. Because he's played Twilight Guardian, he's played Netherspite Historian, he's played Draconet Operative, and now he's played Bookworm. So he doesn't need to hold a dragon from this point on for any sort of additional synergies.
Yeah, it's really curious considering Blackwing Corruptor is one of the strongest turn 5 plays that you can just do in Hearthstone in general. And he seems to be playing a little bit more greedy with things like Curious Glimmerroot, which is better against control. So Masinc may have made a stronger read on the field, saying I anticipate a lot more control and I want to bias my deck towards that. Didn't exactly get that meta call correct, but at the same time, his deck is well prepared in case he hit aggro as well, as you see right now. He's doing just fine.
Well, Tar Creeper, for instance, is and just Reno in general is very powerful. He actually has a pair of Tar Creepers in his Paladin deck as well, so it does look like he anticipated a aggressive field because that's not a normal inclusion in that token Paladin. Bran picked up for Masinc here does combine well with his Twilight Drake. I think he might be trying to think through if he needs to hold a dragon for anything else. Because generally, sort of the heuristic, when you're playing Dragon Priest, you want to hold on to a dragon. You need one in your hand to activate your cards that require that synergy. But I think Masinc may be going back and trying to figure out if he has any left, which I believe he does not, looking at his list.
And of course, also just doing his homework, making sure to keep reference of how many spells LvGe has played from Cabal's Tome if he's not playing around anything specific. And a couple of them have been used. Forbidden Flame and the Greater Arcane Missiles came down. So I think Masinc is ready to push for game-ending damage here. LvGe picks up the cards that he wished he drew in the very beginning stages of the game.
Yeah.
Mana Worm. And without any way to really protect the Mana Worms, without board initiative, LvGe is a sitting duck. No Flame Wakers to be seen, and that spells lights out for Tempo Mage.
Yeah, no real availability of any kind of answers. Again, these Arcane Explosions, great if you run into the aggressive decks, but certainly don't do much against the high health minions from the Dragon Priest.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned something pretty interesting, Brian, about the lack of the secrets in the deck. I think one of the big reasons is, of course, because LvGe anticipates aggro. Things like Mirror Entity is not very good. Counterspell has a lot of things that can just get caught for 1 mana spells or cheaper for damage, so it's not very impactful there. But one of the reasons to play it is because Secret Mage in Wild is actually very, very good. Something that people may have not necessarily anticipated, primarily because of Mad Scientist, but also because of Duplicate. So if you're able to play Cabal Crystal Runners and the new card Arcanologist, and you duplicate Crystal Runners, and you're just playing 0 mana 5/5s, which we all know with Think From Below is very good, That is something that's like slightly surprising that LvGe is not bringing, because I consider Secret Mage to be a little bit stronger than Temple Mage.
Well, there is a Azure Drake for Masinc here, and he gets double draw off of it thanks to the brand if he chooses to fire it off. There's even the Potion of Madness that he could use to take one of these Mana Worms and bump into the other. Potion of Madness plus Shadow Visions attacking with his brand as well. He could clear both of them essentially for free. So a lot of options. Pretty much an embarrassment of riches for Masinc at this point. He could almost randomly play cards at this point and win this game, but he's not going to do that. He's definitely trying to walk through and see what his best options are.
Yep. I mean,
that one worked
Nova
too.
works beautifully as well. Just as the damage, heals everything, pushes for 3, 6, 9, 11 damage this turn.
I mean, heals you to full, heals all your minions to full, kills all your opponent's minions. It's basically like just the nut perfect there. Flawless victory.
The writing was on the wall for a while.
Oh, yeah.
And I do think that this is very symptomatic of the deck building from LvGe,
sure.
that he was very dependent on this Mana Worm start. And if he wasn't going to be able to hit Mana Worm, he needed to hit Flamewakers. If he couldn't hit that, he needed to hit Azure Drake. And he hit none of those in the correct succession. And that's really a losing proposition. Now, if we take a step back and look at it, as the game is going to be over here, LvGe really needed to win that matchup, in my opinion, because if he's going to play this Temple Mage against Reno Mage, that's going to be a really bad time for him. And Paladin is specifically teched against aggro because he has zombie chows. So LvGe has a really difficult position here now that he's lost against his priest. I think that was his best chance.
Yeah, and that didn't look particularly good for him. But we did mention, he drew really the wrong mix of cards at the wrong time. It may have looked like it was a really dominant performance, but it could have gone very differently if those Mana Worms had come on turn 1 instead of turn 10.
Certainly, and Masinc's looking really good so far. The Reno Priest got checked off the list, and now we have just his Reno Mage and his Paladin remaining. Let's take a look at the Priest, because we talked a lot about the deck list and how they're open. If you guys can, of course, bust out your magnifying glasses. We combined the Reno deck list so that way we can consolidate it. It's got some interesting tech in there. We mentioned Curious Glimmerroot, and things like Cabal Songstealer. Very important because of how many Death Rattles are in Wild.
Yeah, and obviously the power cards you get from Wild, Reno Jackson itself, Azure Drake, which was rotated to the Hall of Fame. Light Bomb is one of the really powerful removal effects. One of the key things in Wild, with Light Bomb, you're playing a bunch of dragons that have high health and low attack quite often, or at least generally have more health than they have attack. So Light Bomb is kind of like a Dragonfire Potion in a lot of instances. Kills all of your opponent's things and not yours, and it's also just like more reliable at killing big things, like if you run into giants and things like that.
Absolutely, and you can't forget the power of Dragon Priest being able to snowball early with just stats.
Right.
If you get the Twilight Whelp and you get Wormrest Agent and then you land Valence Chosen, that kind of stat snowball was way before Spike Steed ever started becoming a thing.
Yeah, I remember when the first rotation to Standard happened, and people were talking about how powerful they thought Dragon Priest would be, and the loss of Valence Chosen from Goblins vs. Gnomes was actually such a hit to the deck's power because you didn't have the ability to ever trade up anymore. You had the ability to often just kind of go toe-to-toe with your opponent's drops on curve, but it was Valence Chosen that really allowed you to stick a Wormrest Agent, and then it just dominated the game. But we are into the next game, which will be LvGe's Mage once again, and now it is Masinc playing yet another Reno deck, his own Mage. He has Reno Jackson in his opening hand, as well as Kazakus, so he's a couple of steps there, but Pyroblast and Antonidas are not cards you're looking for in this matchup.
Yeah, and a lot of people probably start thinking, wow, Masinc getting Kazakus and Reno, is he just going to win again? With LvGe's hand, I don't think that's guaranteed at all. He has pretty much the exact type of hand that you'd want to explode with. And now he's able to pair Frostbolt with Ice Lance here. I really like LvGe taking a slower route here and not getting too greedy. He's just going to go for the greed and says, this is a bad matchup. I really need to try to see if I can win immediately and hope that Sorcerer's Apprentice doesn't get removed. And he's calling out Masinc and doesn't have the removal. That's a bold play that's going to pay off in space for LvGe.
Yeah, this is a sort of matchup against a Reno Mage. They don't have that many things that can actually kill a Sorcerer's Apprentice here. There's basically Arcane Blast and Frostbolt that can actually get this off the board at this point. Oh, he does have Forgotten Torch as well. So there's no Forbidden Flame. So this is a high risk but very high reward play for LvGe, as this is quite the turn.
That's 12 damage and spells, or 8 damage and spells with the Flame Waker, plus the 10 damage. Oh my goodness! This is crazy amounts of damage. LvGe is technically setting up a 2-turn lethal just by this play alone.
Welcome to Wild, everyone. This is what can happen when you have all of the cards through the history of Hearthstone, as powerful as they could be. Look at this is turn 3. Masinc is at 9. There's the Forgotten Torch you would have loved to have had last turn.
Yeah.
But unfortunately for LvGe, he's gotten Masinc down to 9, but now he's out of burn. He has that Arcane Blast in his hand, which is obviously fantastic if his opponent had a reasonable target for it. But now, if he picks up Fireball here, he wins the game. But he is still 2 turns away from Masinc just playing Reno Jackson. Yeah, and Dr. Boom, as powerful as he may be, is not what you want when you're just trying to burn your opponent out before Reno.
Yeah, it's going to come down to whether or not LvGe can find the final bits of damage.
So for Masinc here, he can play the Ice Barrier and Ping, or just play Kazakus and pray. You got to ping, I imagine, because you're just preventing the damage from the Sorcerer's Apprentice here anyway.
It's guaranteed. All right. 3 health. So
Masinc has to fade a Fireball right now from LvGe. That's a glyph. So LvGe needs to make the read here. Does he play around Reno Jackson next turn and glyph for a burn spell to win the game right now? He's also afraid this could just be Ice Block too. So maybe he thinks, okay, I should play Lotheb here, because if you don't have Reno, I'm in great shape, but he's going to get the terrible news that Masinc is the one who is going to be rich.
Yeah.
This is the slowest rolled Reno I've ever seen.
There you go. I've seen slower.
Okay, well, it was looking slow. It was looking slow because he hadn't even roused over it yet. I've never seen a more obvious place to play Reno Jackson, so... But now LvGe used all those resources so early and did so much damage to Masinc. But Reno, you know, the treasure hunter that he is, found exactly what he needed to bring Masinc back into the game.
Yep. And LvGe pretty much just going to be too far behind at this point. He tested, by the way, for a counterspell and spellbender just to really do his due diligence by using his Arcane Blast first, but it is going to be extremely difficult. We mentioned that Reno Mage very good at dealing with aggro, and Masinc was just barely able to get over the hump. Firelance Portal just kind of icing on top right now. Masinc didn't need it at all, but it's going to be pretty much the right draw here, assuming that he's not going to get counterspell.
Well, LvGe did just glyph into a secret, and he got a counterspell.
Yeah.
So Masinc thinks, okay, well, if this is counterspell, Firelance Portal is horrible. If this is Spellbender, Firelance Portal is horrible. So yeah, he's going to just take it slow, not risk running any key cards into that counterspell. I could even imagine seeing him play Frost Nova here, just to potentially break a counterspell and then trade into Lotheb. He can just spend all the time in the world at this point. He's at 32. LvGe is down to just 2 cards in hand, and Masinc has an embarrassment of riches in his own.
Yeah, I think he's probably thinking about other potential secrets. We're talking about like duplicate, for example. Do I want to kill Lotheb, give him 2 Lothebs?
I was going for a 1 with his Kazakus here.
So he's going to try to use the 1 to pop the counterspell and spellbender. Interesting.
It is interesting. I feel like your Kazakus spell is so potentially valuable in terms of generating armor or just generating removal, and you have the tools to potentially break a counterspell here and clear Lotheb to prevent any damage coming in, that I likely would have made the Reno trade play.
Well, I think in Masinc's mind, he gets more damage onto the board this way, too.
It's true.
Maybe he can like rush his opponent down.
It is true, but it's not really how the matchup goes. I mean, yes, you do need to kill your opponent before they burn you out, but you just have so many resources already that I feel like you can spend some of them and save your Kazakus, for instance, to just get armor. It's one of the key cards at keeping you alive against opposing burn, especially once Reno is gone.
But say if he uses Frost Nova and kind of leverages his board right now for 9 damage, it looks like.
He does have Pyroblast.
Then, yeah, you can probably set up...
So it's true. It is true that with Frost Nova this turn, he can even Frost Nova, Ice Block, Ping Face, attack for a bunch of damage, and then he has the Forgotten Torch the following turn. Yeah, I think that actually maybe what we do end up seeing with this particular sequence. He can just kill his opponent over the course of 2 turns with Ice Block backup, thanks to the Pyroblast in his hand. So yeah, I mean, it's the sort of thing that there's so many roads to victory here because LvGe did expend so many of his early resources, and then just Reno Jackson saved the day.
Yep, this is looking like LvGe is once again cornered here, and Reno Mage able to pretty much just lock out the aggressive decks. And Reno Mage, as we mentioned, is a lot better at dealing with it, primarily because their early removal spells, and also because their hero power just lets them pair things together. And when you have one that's geared as anti-aggro, as what Masinc has, for example, he has Volcanic Potion, and he has, you know, all those early game cards. It's just going to be really difficult to try to ever establish board. LvGe getting creative here, pinging his own Boombot to try and get some damage and stop his opponent from pushing. Because it's very clear that Masinc is trying to burn his way through. And if he can keep a board of 12, 13 damage, he may be able to do this, but it's still looking really bad.
Yeah, it is desperation at this point for LvGe, just trying to find a way to piece together a survival plan against Masinc's threatened burn. But Masinc still has Firelance Portal plus Ping or Frostbolt to get enough damage through. If he just wants to rely on just Power Blast for lethal next turn, there is the possibility if you Firelance Portal, you get a corrupted heal bot, and you end up not putting yourself in a position where you actually have that lethal damage the following turn. So Masinc is actually just going to go with the reliable burn to the face, putting LvGe down to exactly 10. And anyone who's played against Freeze Mage or Burn Mage in Standard knows exactly what that means.
Absolutely. LvGe is going to try to see what he can get, but looks like nothing from the Sorcerer's Apprentice. So he's going to play as if he doesn't acknowledge the Pyroblast, do his due diligence. That's going to be the end of game number 2, and Masinc off to a great start. LvGe's read on the aggro lineup's not paying off at all, as he just happened to run into the guy that's brought in 3 Reno decks, and right now has stricken them across the board because Reno Warlock's banned. So he only has to win with Paladin.
It briefly looked at Pyroblast as targeting a sheep, but ultimately it did not, and it was LvGe's face, and Masinc goes up to a 2-0 lead, just 1 game away from moving to the semifinals.
And I really wonder if Masinc has the proper deck and lineup to just kill every single aggro deck out there. And a lot of people may have thought that aggro was the way. Maybe the other aggro players are watching right now and sweating a little bit. You know, Control, for example, is the other aggro player in this side of the bracket. Maybe he's like, oh man, I really hope I don't play against him because I have an aggro lineup. You know, at the same time, we'll see because the series isn't over. We've seen reverse sweeps even in unfavorable positions such as this.
Yeah, and the remaining deck for Masinc is the Paladin, which is very powerful, but is a deck that if you don't find those zombie chows early, can potentially struggle against aggro.
Absolutely. So we do have another game coming up here, but before we go to that, Raven and Sottle have a couple of words they want to bring up about that game that we just saw.
Thanks, Rodan. It's an awesome series overall, actually, so far. You know, it's very exciting just seeing 2 very different lineups go against each other. But there was a key turn in that game where LvGe almost got there, right? We saw how quickly he went with the Flame Waker to put that much damage on Masinc. But this play was very, very interesting, dude.
It was a potential game-winning moment for LvGe, and Kibler brought it up that, of course, the Primordial Glyph into Fireball was a potential out. But I think when you actually break down the numbers, LvGe for sure made the right play. Because first things first, that secret in that spot could have been Ice Block, in which case Fireball is just, you throw the game away 100%. But even purely mathematically, I know the numbers in Standard, which getting Fireball exactly is 3 out of 31 chance. I don't know exactly how many spells got added in Wild. I wish I did. I'm exactly the kind of tryhard that would do that before this event, but I just didn't get around to it. But it's less likely in that situation. So your percentage chance of ripping the exact Fireball you need off that is just lower than your opponent having Reno in hand by that point, right?
And also just too low, because if that happens, you're never going to win the game, right? You need that low step down.
So the only way that you would ever go for that Fireball play in that spot is if you just had the 100% hard read that Reno was in hand and you needed that game-winning position. And in that point anyway, you still had like Lotheb, Dr. Boom in hand.
Yeah, there was enough to go late.
You felt like you would go for board presence. So I think even though that was a potential game-winning moment, I think LvGe for sure made the right play in that spot.
Yeah, so that's going to be it. Just wanted to point that cool turnout and that cool play, but we are going to go back to Frodan Kibler to continue the rest of this series.
Thanks very much, guys. I think a really good point, the fact that he had to go for the winning play. One thing that we also want to point out, it wasn't just Ice Block, it was also Counterspell.
Right.
As a possible scenario. So 2 out of 3 secrets were instant lose on the spot, and then he had to hit the 1 in 53 or something like that in terms of hitting the right spell, assuming that Fireball was only out there, because I don't think he could have hit Firelink Portal since he was 1 mana off.
And that's one of the important things to keep in mind about Hearthstone at a high-level competitive event like this, is that sometimes you can make the right play and potentially lose because of it. You're making the mathematically correct play in a lot of situations, and like they said, unless you 100% know that's Ice Barrier and 100% know there's a Reno in hand, you just never go for that play.
All right, well, so we come down to what could be the last game in this series. LvGe is just going to pivot and say, you know what? Cool off the tempo, Mage. It could be the reason why I lose the series. We're kind of talking about how Mage needs to get a win. Couldn't do it against Priest. Might just get swept here. And LvGe says, you know what? I'm just going to try to take my best matchup here, which is Shaman versus Paladin. In fact, we were talking about this before the series, and we're saying that on Masinc's side, his weak link is Paladin. If Paladin is weak against Shaman, it's weak against Druid, but if it can get a win against the Mage, then that will be the turning point of the series. So LvGe is not out by any means, but this Paladin is also very anti-aggro. It can maybe get a win against any of these decks.
It is. Not only does it have the 2 copies of Zombie Chow, which are really the superstar anti-aggro card that exists in Wild, they also have 2 copies of Tar Creeper. And we've seen how powerful Tar Creeper can be at shutting down aggressive decks in Standard for the entire Angora metagame.
Well, no early game here from Masinc, and missing that turn 1 play is pretty massive if Shaman's able to follow up. LvGe kind of has a follow-up, but it's a little sketchy considering that Flame Tongue isn't exactly the best just with 1 minion, and LvGe has 2 things from below, so he's probably also tempted to start toteming.
That said, the Flame Tongue Totem does represent damage now and overturns in terms of your opponent actually not really necessarily having great ways to deal with it as they are playing Paladin. So I actually think that playing Flame Tongue there was potentially justifiable just because you're trying to get as much damage in as you can before your opponent's powerful stuff gets online. But Masinc here, no 2-drop either. He does not have the shielded mini-bot. Does pick up an Equality, but Equality in this deck is not really quite the quality Pyromancer type clear consistently that you have in other control-style decks. It's more often paired with even just a weapon from Muster for Battle or your recruits themselves. It looked like Masinc was even considering playing it that turn to set up the Muster for Battle in the following turn.
Yeah, but I think the Taunt Totem sets up too much of a problem. LvGe has the opportunity to Flame Tongue now. I mean, he can also Hero Power and try to take it even slower and set up a big swing turn. The problem with that is we do know that Paladin has potential ways to come back. And in his mind, what he did was actually opened up his possibilities. If Masinc played something proactive on the board, like Stonehill Defender, he was able to play Flame Tongue Totem and make up the damage that he lost, because Flame Tongue Totem would do 4 damage over 2 turns, and if he played a Totem, he'd be able to get 4 damage that turn as well.
All right, so Masinc here has the Muster for Battle, which is the sort of superpower turn 3 play for the Paladin deck. Chooses to go with the Stonehill Defender. Arcane Nullifier, not something I've seen in a Stonehill Discover very often.
Yeah, this is something also, again, to point out, we mentioned this with Primordial Glyph. The pool has been diluted significantly with the addition of a lot of Mage spells back into it. But Stonehill Defender doesn't actually hit Tyrion as often as you would think compared to Standard, because the pool, once again, has opened up significantly through Goblins vs. Gnomes. There's a handful of taunts also in the Grand Tournament that came out, too.
Are there more Paladin taunts? I don't know that there's actually more Paladin taunts that are in this. There's got to be something.
There's just more cards in general in
Right.
the pool, so you're less likely to hit him exactly. But there is that still discovered bonus chance to hit Paladin.
Right. Devolve is quite a powerful card in this matchup. We mentioned how strong the synergies are between the recruits and the cards that buff them. Devolve turns all those recruits into wisps, or perhaps target dummies, or Murloc Tiny Fins in this format.
That's right. That's right. Target
Like
dummy.
forgetting the name of Tiny Fin. He's like, I've cried over his death so many times, and here I am. There he is. Yeah. Look at how cute he is. Aww. That's actually maybe a nerf to Devolve, because you devolve your opponent's things, and then you see a Tiny Fin, and you're like, I can't possibly kill it. Look at it. It's got little hearts over its head.
I mean, that's actually like one of the weird cases for maybe Murloc Paladin still being very good in Wild against Shaman, because if they devolve, you still hit a bunch of Murlocs for Megasaur anyways. One of the interesting things in this position is Masinc was forced to consecrate, but LvGe, I mean, he did lose a lot, but he has a really, really powerful reload with hero power and double thing from below right now.
He does, though. Masinc does still have that equality, and because he coined out the Lost in the Jungle on his turn, he's able to utilize those minions and the Muster for Battle weapon alongside the equality. So if LvGe does go for a major reload and commits a lot to this board, that equality is going to punish him hard.
And we do know the deck list, and Masinc is very much in tune with the fact that LvGe is playing an aggressive deck. So he's making a read on his hand, saying you have to be playing things like the thing from below, primarily because of how slow you've played this. And it's the correct read here. LvGe just going to go with his most powerful play because his opponent just used a consecration, less likely for him to deal with it. Masinc has to be holding a quality, and he just so happens to have it. That is a very important swing here. LvGe just lost his entire tempo.
Yeah, and Masinc taking his time here, but I imagine the play that we will see is equality and muster, and then there be nothing but a flame tongue on the board for LvGe at the end of the turn.
Yep.
And LvGe is going to need to find a Maelstrom portal, and quickly, because there is even Sunkeeper Tarim waiting in Masinc's hand to buff all those recruits right back up. We see Sunkeeper Tarim be so powerful in Standard. Is a lot more powerful when you can do this sort of thing in Wild.
He does have Devolve, so maybe LvGe feels like he can take it a little bit slower.
Lightning Storm, though, picked up for LvGe.
Yeah, another aggro.
It's decent here, but you know when you're Lightning Storming on a board that's just 3/1/1s, because of the threat of Tarim, and this is one of the things that makes this Paladin deck so strong, is because it has all of these powerful buffs with the Stegodon, with Tarim, with Quartermaster, that if you do give them like a brief window with multiple recruits in play, you can get so severely punished. Sometimes you just need to commit removals here. But there is the Devolve waiting in LvGe's hand as well.
Yeah, he's got Devolve and Storm, which actually lines up really well the next turn because you get to squeeze in a hero power or a really cheap thing otherwise. And LvGe this turn also has the ability to maybe get a little fortunate here with a Taunt Totem. So that leaves him with what looks like to be 4 mana, which I guess lines up very perfectly with Pilot Shredder. Does not land the Stoneclaw Totem, so Masinc will be able to get a very proactive trade, but the Searing Totem can fight back, so at least Masinc, if he does do that, will get some damage on him with the Light's Justice. This is, of course, assuming that Masinc immediately plays the Tarim. He actually does have an option to play the Light through Stegodon.
Yeah, Stegodon's great in this board, too, is the thing. And +3 health.
Okay.
The others are basically useless in this for this particular purpose.
The first reveal was like, well, that was actually pretty bad adapt. But in this spot, definitely really strong because of the threat of Quartermaster, which is even in a lot of cases better than the Tarim buff that you would get.
And this is another of those spots for LvGe where he does have Devolve, he has Lightning Storm, and the threat of these recruits possibly becoming even bigger and scarier is pretty huge. They're not that threatening just yet, but if there is a Quartermaster waiting in the hand, if there is the Sunkeeper Tarim that is in the hand, that can go very badly for LvGe if he does not do something this turn.
He is coming up on turn 7, which tends to be slightly awkward for the Paladins, because normally around turn 8 is when it starts getting crazy again, because they can play big threats like Tyrion, they can play Muster for Battle Quartermaster, they can play like Steward Darkshire, Light into Darkness. There's like so many like different combos on turn 8 that you can go for. Turn 7's a little awkward because it's usually like Curator, or you're pairing together kind of awkward cards together. So maybe LvGe wants to use this one last turn to like try to set up a board, and if my opponent goes for something a little bit weak, I can use my Devolve and Lightning Storm proactively.
But Devolve is great at stopping the recruit buffs, but does nothing against Sunkeeper Tarim.
Yeah.
Now these are going to be some scary target dummies and Tiny Fins right here.
This is kind of what I was just leading up and towards, the fact that you can save Devolve and Lightning Storm because you know turn 8's so powerful. However, LvGe is just saying, you know what, I can't win against Quartermaster. I'm going to go for it. And he's getting punished here by the Tarim.
Don't know, he's killing the Tiny Fin. No, why? Why the Tiny Fin?
He's playing around Hungry Crab.
Oh, why'd you have to do it?
Yeah, We all know LvGe, of course, doesn't have a crab. Murlocs are not very powerful in Wild at all. Just
oh, and there's Maelstrom Portal the next turn, right after he fired off Devolve.
But can you really blame LvGe for devolving that position? Because he was protecting his attributes.
Yeah, it is a threatening board because there are far more things that buff recruits. There's additional copies of Stegadon. There's the Quartermasters. So those recruits are really threatening.
Yep.
He could have potentially tried to wait until they were buffed and then fire off the Devolve, but at that point, you're playing the aggressive deck that needs to be proactive. You can't just sit back and try and answer your opponent's threats when they've lined up perfectly. You need to get pressure on, and LvGe just has not been able to do it through Masinc's answers this game.
That's right. And what this Paladin ends up doing is one of the most powerful aspects of mid-range decks in the late stages of the game, and why they've been able to even win against control is because hero power and passing is still very much a threat. We've seen that with mid-range Shaman, we've seen that with a lot of Warlock decks, we've seen that with even Hunters to a certain extent, and Paladin now has its own version where if you just even have a 1/1 token, very frightening with what they can do off of one recruit.
And now these... No recruits on the board, but still a very strong board for Masinc here. He even has Lotheb to potentially shut down LvGe's possible answers. He can play the Curator, which will find him another Light Fuse Stegadon, which is the play he decides to make. And yeah, we'll just push in damage here. Asking LvGe, okay, well, can you answer this board? And if you can, I can follow up with Stand Against Darkness into Light Fuse Stegadon, or some other combination of just powerful recruits and minions. Bloodlust, that's the card that you always seem to draw when you're playing a Shaman deck and your opponent has 4 minions to your 1.
Yeah, that is very powerful. I apologize. I actually did not see the Bloodlust. Therefore, I guess that technically converts it to a mid-range Shaman at this point because it's genuine and Bloodlust. Because a lot of the aggro decks and mid-range Shaman do tend to blend their deck list. It's sometimes a little bit of a hybrid.
Well, LvGe has a very unusual build of Shaman. He has so many one-ofs. We were actually talking about this the other day, about how he was just a few cards away from a Reno Shaman deck because he's got 1 Bloodlust, he's got 1 Lightning Bolt, he's got 1 Lightning Storm.
Yeah, but he doesn't have some of the other really powerful mid-range cards like the...
Thunderbluff.
Thunderbluff
Valiant.
Yeah, thank you. You knew exactly what I was
thinking. I did. But yeah, all these one-ofs, but in fact, I believe what he has is 1 game left in this tournament because this is looking very bad for LvGe here. Yeah. He is dominated in terms of life total, in terms of board presence, in terms of resources, cards in hand. It is just going all downhill like this entire match has, frankly, for him.
And Masinc can set up a very powerful scenario of playing Lotheb and recruits to set up for potential way to kill his opponents. A little off curve though, so maybe he looks for more efficiency, but I'm hard pressed to find something better than that. He can push a lot of damage this turn, set up Lotheb, really denies his opponent from being able to use AoE effectively, and then set up his little recruits there as well.
Reporting for duty.
Yeah, the Lotheb means that even Maelstrom Portal essentially takes LvGe's entire turn. He can't possibly pair it with the Lightning Storm.
Hey!
Blood Mage. Okay, Blood Mage Storm. That will clear up most of this board. That was a crucial draw for LvGe. He needed that or a spell damage totem to even have much of a chance to remain in the game.
Yeah, that guarantees a clear on everything except Lotheb. And even gets the 4 damage, so Fatherless Portal will be guaranteed against that as well. Oh boy, that is a very big time draw here for Masinc. Your opponent just used Lightning Storm with Thalnos.
And now you make 5 3/3s along with a 2/5.
Yep.
Fun fact, by the way, did you know that the Quartermaster art was actually the World of Warcraft trading card game art for Girdle of Uther? That's why he's like thrusting his like hips out so far. It was an equipment card art originally in that game.
Did you model for that? Right.
No, that was actually Rob Wing when he was working out. Sunkeeper Tarim for Masinc is yet another way to buff these huge swarms of tokens he can make.
Yeah, Masinc gonna play a little bit more cautiously here, just to set up.
Another Maelstrom Portal is actually one of the best cards in LvGe's deck, but that is just not going to be enough. Masinc is able to build a relatively stable board here with some high health minions and Sunkeeper Tarim plus just the Light's Justice. is very likely to represent lethal next turn. I don't see a way out of this for LvGe unless those Maelstrom portals give him taunts, and then it's just delaying the inevitable.
Taunts or Stoneclaw Totem. Spell damage. That allows him to clear everything if he needs to clear everything. Probably will end up just using Portal again in this position. Unless he feels like he really needs to risk it by leaving up 5 power on the board. Ooh, that's really sketchy if he does that. Oh, that doesn't feel good having to Portal again, but looks like he's just going to barely stay alive.
He's now used all of his AoE against a token deck. And he's just going to get swarmed once again.
Yeah. For the rest of the series, that is.
Yeah.
Little time for LvGe, just kind of milking the last few seconds. Hoping that Masinc doesn't have any way to refill. He's got plenty. Spike Ridge Steed, not going to be even necessary here. Standing against Darkness and Quartermaster is the dominant board position here, and he's already seen every form of area effect card.
There is one other devolve remaining in the deck, but with the Sunkeeper Terram, even if your minions get devolved, they just turn into 3/3s once again.
LvGe has one more draw. He picks up Devolve. Now, I wonder if there's any kind of card that can help him in this position. If the Devolves, which are 1 mana, go to 0 mana, there's not much. You know, I was thinking of, like, what if there's, like, Tentacle of N'Zoth or Doomsayers? But
yeah, no.
There's really nothing here that comes off the top of my head.
And it looks like the perfect draw. Ooh, double Tiny Fin, double target dummy. It's so much more interesting to devolve one drops in Wild.
Yeah. They're not just all wisps.
Yeah, but it does not matter, as Ungoro does in fact belong to the Titans, and this match belongs to Masinc. He takes it 3-0.
Yeah, LvGe extremely worried about running into Masinc's lineup, and the triple Reno is gonna take it 3-0. Masinc is in the semifinals.
Yeah, and yeah, that was really just a dominating performance. We saw the weakness of the Mage deck from LvGe because of the way he chose to tech his deck against aggressive decks, and we saw much the same in that match, where lots of individual removal and more sort of reactive cards didn't really give him enough pressure to take down the Paladin before its powerful token generation got online.
Absolutely, and you know what? As much as LvGe and Chinese fans might be disappointed there, a top 8 at the Wild Open Finals. And being able to go to the top 8 or top 16 there of the Hearthstone Championship Tour Bahamas, I think he's had a great year performance, even if you might feel like he's been eliminated a little bit earlier than what you guys might expect.
Yeah, and this goes to show just how there are variety of powerful strategies, powerful decks in Wild as well. Lots of people were saying, oh, just all Pirate Warrior everywhere. It's like, well, we just saw triple Reno end up taking the series.
That's right. So Masinc is the victor here, as his triple Reno lineup is going to prevail against the aggressive strategies. Let's go ahead and hop over to the analysis camp for a few words with our winner.
Thanks a lot, Frodo. And I am here with Masinc, who just won. So first off, congratulations on the win. I want to ask you about, you were feeling nervous. This is the first tournament experience you've had. How was it actually being on the stage playing in that match?
おめでとうございます。初めての大会としてはの感想はいかがですか？
ありがとうございます。今回はなかなかいい結果、今回はなかなかいいドローができて、うまく回せたなと思って、はい、この調子でいきたいなと思っています。
Thank you very much. I got a fortunate draw, and I hope I'm able to continue successfully moving forward.
Okay, well, it looked like you were playing well to me. And after that first win, now that you've won one match, are you feeling confident about the rest of your matches?
なかなかいい結果でしたね。これからの自信はありますか？
努力します。
I'll do my best.
Awesome. Well, congratulations again. It's a pleasure watching. And we'll be right back with the next series coming up, but we're going to go back to Frodan and Kibler first.
Thank you very much, Raven. That's right. I told you, the guy was very modest and humble. So even though it felt like he was really nervous and had some anxiety prior to the tournament. Look, when he was on the stage, I think he played very fine. I didn't think he overthought anything really too much. He played very safe. Was even thinking about corner outs that his opponent could have and played around that as well.
Yeah, I think that he navigated those decks quite well, and I love to see those kind of decks doing well.
Sure, I'm sure you're very happy.
So I gotta say I'm rooting for him.
All right, well, that's just the first of 4 matches that we have today. Remember, single elimination top 8. LvGe is out, and APAC proves their strength once again. At least Japan does. We'll see if his other fellow APAC player, the Korean Noragoon, can continue on the bottom half of the bracket. We have match number 2